to the event. To our eminent speakers and delegates who have come representing organization and institutes, I bid you a warm welcome to the event. We are indeed honored to have you here with us, and we hope that we make this event successful and fruitful. Without taking much of time, let me introduce our first guest speaker for the day. 15 years in senior management positions, also been associated with multinationals and startups. Widespread of functional competence in business development, marketing and sales, product strategy, product development, high volume manufacturing, downstream and partnerships and organizational development. So please put your hands together for Mr. Vinesh Shah.
Today I decided not to use any PowerPoint, but just walk you through things that are more experiential for me and I don't have to prepare. Good morning, everyone. You may have heard in the last maybe a year, intensifying in the last 1 year, variety of policies, incentives by the government of India and the establishment of 2 semiconductor fabrication units in India. Some of you may wonder, why did it take so long? Why did it not happen before? You also hear from the industry leaders a lack of innovation in this country, lack of IPR, no electronic manufacturing, tremendous consumption, and no local product development companies, primarily focusing on services sector, where we are thriving very well and a role model for the whole world. What I will do, I will walk you through from the early 90s to set a context for the situation we are in today. And for many of you, you probably were in the secondary education, in your early schooling, and would not have this context, why we are in the state that we are in today. Luckily, over the last 3 years, I have been well informed as well as involved in some of the policies that the government has drafted and has now passed as through the parliament. And what kind of opportunities does it offer to you all as members of the semicon industry and members of a larger industry called the electronics industry. So I will end with a few lines of thought which are opportunities perhaps for professionals like you. So let's trace back to pre-90 period. The country over 3 decades of independence has had, for the 3 decades after independence, has shown just 1% GDP growth rate. So 30 years out of the total years of independence that we've had, the GDP growth rate has been just 1%. And predominantly because the country has been very socialist, averse to foreign direct investments, very regulated market, no privatization. Now, things came to a situation in 1990 that the government was very close to defaulting on payments to the international community. Now, effectively, the country was at the state of going bankrupt, like the Greek and the Spanish situations that you have read in the recent past. And the country really had to pledge a few tens of tons of gold, that's all it had, to the International Monetary Fund as a quote-unquote bank guarantee. When a country gets into that state, it's a very difficult situation. So the country was pushed, and it was the time of Narasimha Rao, who was the Prime Minister. He was pushed against a wall to open up the economy for foreign investment. So the first step was deregulation. The government controlled who gets to participate in what industry, what do they produce, how much do they produce, and who do they sell to, and at what price. This was the state of affairs before, during the regulated market. So you had this big business houses, the Tatas, the Birlas, and a variety of others who were part of the trusted circle of the government and would get these benefits to start up new manufacturing units. So this is what is regulation. Privatization. Most of core industries were run as government institutions, and very difficult for the government institutions to be profitable, to run very efficiently, because they also have a social cause to serve. The government was very averse to foreign investments, so that was opened up. Foreign companies could participate in the economy of India. Now, what did that lead to? Over the next 14 years, 91 to, in fact, 20 years now, 2014, 23 years roughly, we've seen 6 to 8% GDP growth, which is very healthy. And what does that mean for us all? There is a rise in income. When there is a rise in income of the people because consumption increases, we also tend to spend money. So consumption went up because incomes went up. Now, around 1997, India signed the ITA 1, which is called the International Technology Agreement 1, with the World Trade Organization. The consequences were far-reaching, which we realized over the next 16 years. And it made products like computers, set-top boxes, telecom equipment, semiconductor devices, semiconductor manufacturing equipment, amongst others, including scientific instruments, reduce their import duties to zero. Now, just to give you an example, before, let's say, 1997, the import duties on all of these products was 67%, nearly. 67% was the import duty. Well, on one hand, it made it very expensive to import and deprived many institutions, professionals, companies of with access to these equipment, which was necessary for productivity. Within a period of 8 years, from 97 to 2005, nearly 800 products belonging to 165 different categories dropped their customs or import duties from 67% to 0%. Now we can imagine what happens to already a largely unorganized manufacturing sector in this country, comprising of small and medium enterprises. It's a shock during the 8-year period when this transformation takes place, complete import duties being exempt, and the entire international industry then gets to compete with Indian manufacturers, Indian industry on a level playing field, while having a tremendous advantage of economies of scale, global economies of scale. It effectively destroyed the manufacturing industry in India. Hardware manufacturers became hardware assemblers. So companies that could produce to a great extent and also significantly add value through IPR or through some significant knowledge developed in system integration. It was all lost, and what is popularly called as screwdriver technology took control. So all that you did was the last step in the manufacturing process: assemble the mechanicals, create user documentation, get a nice carton box, print on it, and then put these things together and ready for shipping and logistics. And this is what happened to many public sector undertakings like ITI, for example, BEL. They were reduced to just assembling because you still needed to access government orders. The last step of the manufacturing process had to be done at the public sector undertaking. The economic value add was very little, but the commercial value add was about 7%. This is what happened during the 20-year period. Now, during the same time, and in fact earlier, in 1986, 1 year after TI started its operations here, the government launched something called as a National Software Policy. 1986, imagine. The country had not even opened up its economy to the outside world. It happened only in 1991 when pushed against a wall. But way back in 1985, the National Hardware Policy was drafted. 1980, rather, I should not say hardware policy, National Computer Policy. And in 1986, the National Software Policy was drafted. Primarily to, the trend during that period was software development was decoupled from the expensive and complex hardware on which it would eventually run because of client-server computing setting in. So the mainframes could still be residing in the US, while the software could be developed on terminals that could be from HP or from IBM or you name it, from Microsoft or any other hardware manufacturer. So this decoupling and this client-server architecture led the government to believe that there is a big opportunity in tapping the potential of the Indian engineering community. And very interesting policies were put in place. The most notable is the Software Technology Park of India, STPI, that provided easy access to import, seamless access, lot reduced bureaucracy. In some cases, it was just a pure operation that I'm importing something, and the customs would not even check it. So this was the level of trust that STPI as a structure created. And of course, the concept of 100% export-oriented units that led to a large export industry with good tax holidays. And you see already now it's almost nearly reaching, Pradeep, about $100 billion, the software services industry. Very well done. So software and the services industry has thrived and today is a significant part of our GDP. However, if you look at hardware manufacturing, the deficit, the net, we have a deficit of about $30 to $40 billion as reported by the government. In our electronic hardware manufacturing, we are net importers, although we do export, but we import a lot more. If you take the differential, is nearly $40 billion today. And you look at various reports from Frost & Sullivan, also published by Department of IT, the trend is that we will have a huge deficit of nearly $300 billion in the next 10 years. The number of years that it takes to reach 400 billion consumption can be debated, but that is secondary. Deficit is what makes it very relevant. So that is a snapshot of where we are today. Deficit in manufacturing, very successful in services. However, emphasis on specialized education, PhDs for example, is still minimal. Innovation, IPR development, Indian companies spending a significant portion of their revenues on R&D is minimal. And this has caused the government to really wonder where this would head in another 5 to 10 years' time. We made an attempt in 2007 to kick off the semicon manufacturing during the time of Mr. Dayanidhi Maran, but they did not take off for various reasons. But what I'm happy to say is that in 2011, this initiative was resurrected, and a comprehensive policy called the National Policy on Electronics was formed, which was passed in 2012. Those of you who are interested to understand what kind of implications it can have and what does it cover, you should read, go to the Ministry of IT website, and there's a fantastic document called the National Policy on Electronics, which is the mother document for realizing the vision of a competitive electronic, which covers also the semicon industry over the next 10 to 15 years, covering manufacturing, covering skill development, covering technology transfers, and encouraging R&D. So broad space. Question from skeptics will be how much will of all of this document and the vision will eventually be implemented. Now, of course, that is always questionable, but we have to take it with the spirit in terms of comprehensiveness and thought that has gone into developing this policy. I would say it's about the best of its kind that I've seen. Under the National Policy on Electronics, two major initiatives have already been communicated and announced. One is the setting up of 2 semiconductor fabs. One through a consortium of JP Associates, which is into real estate, big infrastructure constructions, dams, hydel projects, cement industry, pretty diversified company, very cash rich. Has tied up with IBM for technology transfer. And from what I read, it begins with 90 nanometers, 65, 40, and 28. So there's a agreement covers a wide range of process technologies starting with 90 nanometer. And Tower Jazz Semiconductors of Israel, which is a contract manufacturer, is part of the same consortium which will implement the entire fab, operationalize it, and then hand it over back to the promoter, JP Associates. One consortium. The second consortium is led by Hindustan Semiconductor Manufacturing, which also had an active interest in 2007. Has tied up with ST Microelectronics for technology transfer, and Siltero of Malaysia for establishing the fab. The government has approved these projects. Now, of course, the detailed project plans are still ongoing. But in principle, the capital grant, which is the most significant part, nearly 25 to 27% of the total capital investment. Now imagine, these are fabs costing about $3 billion over a 5-year period, let's say. You're talking about some total of about $6 to $8 billion worth investment from these two consortia, of which 25% is given as a capital grant. It's not even an equity, not a loan. It's a capital grant given by the government to overcome the various disabilities that have been highlighted by the industry for setting up manufacturing in India. It could be infrastructure, it could be power, high cost of capital, limited access to skilled manpower for semiconductor manufacturing, and lack of an ecosystem. So the combined financial cost of this disability is to the tune of 20-25%, depending on who you ask. And the government has overcome those infrastructural disabilities by providing a financial incentive. So the investment from the government, which comes from the taxpayers like us, is to the tune of nearly $2 billion to just two companies, which is very significant. That also tells you the kind of commitment that the government is offering to develop electronic manufacturing. Point number one. Point number two, in the broadest sense, electronic manufacturing per se, unless there is growth in electronic manufacturing, semiconductors is on the upstream of this entire industry. Unless it's an completely export-oriented manufacturing, it is very unlikely that semiconductor industry in India will thrive. While there are debates about is a semicon industry serving a global need because of the volumes and the logistics, can be debated, but from a manufacturing security perspective for the country, these two fabs have been approved ahead of electronics manufacturing. But there is the second policy called MSIPS, which is something that you should also, those of you who have an entrepreneurial intent over a period of time, should also look up this policy called Modified Special Incentive Package. The Modified Special Incentive Package offers 25%, again, capital grant, very similar to the fab, to a wide range of industries in the electronics domain. It's a capital grant. If you wish to set up a test and characterization lab, or a small semiconductor specialized packaging, as ATMP for example, a small one, it could be $50 million or maybe 100 million, maybe lower. There is a threshold beyond which the government grants 25% capital. You invest this year, and the next fiscal year, the money gets into your account to the extent of 25% of the total capital invested. Pretty transparent, simple. So again, for those that are looking to invest or seek investments, 25% grant is coming from the industry, from the government, which makes it a lot easier to secure do the financial closure for the rest of the project. So MSIPS is the second, the two semicon fabs are the first. Thirdly, great, you have created an incentive for manufacturing, but how are you going to stimulate consumption in the country? Why will these companies that manufacture have an advantage to sell in the country? Government set up something called the preferential market access policy, which is again approved. The government declares that 30% of all procurement by the government in electronic systems will be reserved for quote-unquote made in India products. For example, if BSNL were to tender modems or GPONs, which is the current passive optical networks is big thing now, because fiber optic links are being taken to into the metros as well as into the rural areas. So when these big tenders come, and I think one of the tenders has already come, and one of the bidders has won, 30% of the total procurement will be reserved for made in India product. Now what does made in India product mean? Made in India product means, in case of GPON, which is a system, it's a end user equipment, uh, or consumer premise equipment or a curb equipment, the total value addition from India in terms of electronic bill of materials has to be 30%, which means at the system level, 30% of the components have to be sourced from Indian manufacturers. And it increases first year 30%, second year 40, and the third year 50. And I think it stops at 50 or 60, depending on the category of products. So you see, again, it's very clear in government procurement, the government has already established an intent to increasingly source from made in India products. The system itself need not come from India, but the system should have 30% of its bill of materials sourced in India, which also means that the eventual system integration should happen in India. So it implies that multinationals or Indian companies will have to set up their final system integration and test facilities in India. And then of course, the backward integration will over a period of time develop. Far-reaching. This was tried for the private industry also, especially in the telecommunication domain, because telecommunication has security element in it. But the international trade lobby fiercely argued against it, and for now the government has kept it on hold. But for all government procurement except defense, the preferential market access policy applies. Again, a very significant and a bold move by the government. So combining the consumption in the government, which the government has control over, and incentives for manufacturing, lay a very good foundation for manufacturing in this country. So what does this all mean then, eventually? Something else that I would like to refer to is skill development. Fine, manufacturing is okay, it needs quite some technicians, some line supervisors, some shop floor managers. The government is very clear that the focus of manufacturing should be not on low cost, but innovation-led manufacturing. Now, there is a huge deficiency of PhDs in this country in selected domains, whether it's telecommunications, consumer electronics, medical devices, strategic electronics, which also includes defense. Just recently, I got a letter from the government asking for inputs. The government is planning to establish, to create a financial incentive for PhDs in selected domains. The government wants to develop 1,500 to 2,000 PhDs over the next 5 years. In addition to the scholarships that a PhD would get, the government, I think, is considering providing another 20,000 rupees or 25,000 rupees per month as a grant to a PhD in selected domains. Also providing the necessary lab infrastructure and for funding professors in colleges under the same scheme. Any institution which is an IIT, IISc, national institutes or a deemed university can make a proposal to set up a new research facility in, let's say, medical electronics, and the government would provide all the necessary grants required. It does not cover everything, but a large portion of setting up a lab in medical electronics, financing the faculty, and then start inviting the PhDs. Also, young faculty members who want to pursue research. You're a professor in a college. The college itself is not able to fund your research interests. Such of these young faculty members may seek funding from the government to start a new research program in situations where the university itself is not able to finance the research program. So you see, for the student, PhD, for the institution, a deemed university, IIT, NITs or IISc, and also for young faculty members who want to pursue research, now a very good financing mechanism has been established. So this is primarily addressing the skill development, not at the lower levels, not at vocational training, manufacturing level, which is anyway ongoing through something called as the National Skill Development Council, which is the other one. It's called NSDC, the National Skill Development Council, which is looking to develop technicians, diploma holders, ITIs, primarily for the manufacturing sector setup. But while the one that I talk about is primarily for developing innovation in these sectors. So where does this all place you guys? Now, if you just follow the TSMC model, why did TSMC become so successful? And is it a role model for these two fabs that will come up in the near future? Definitely yes. Now, TSMC has developed a fantastic ecosystem of small companies as well as larger companies. The smaller companies, of course, develop IP, which are silicon verified, production ready, proven, and can be and are promoted by TSMC as a part of its large ecosystem to any customer of TSMC. Is that essential for these two fabs to also thrive and succeed? Obviously, yes. Is there a large number of availability of talent here in India to develop such an ecosystem, to develop IP, for example? Definitely, yes. So this is, I would say, a very interesting opportunity to associate either as a multinational company or as an Indian service company or as an Indian product company. I think at some point in time, those of you for whom this is relevant will have to start talking to these two companies and or following the progress of these two companies to place yourself at the right time, at the right place to be a partner to these two companies. And that will also imply, of course, getting at subsidized prices, test wafers, getting yourself set up for getting your wafer pilot produced through their pilot wafer lots. Please follow this ecosystem very closely, especially those that are involved with semiconductors and silicon in particular. And for those who are looking for an entrepreneurial stint in the future, I see that the semiconductors per se does offer these opportunities primarily around the two fabs. While the opportunities landscape is much bigger for those focusing at the system level in electronics, in the short term for semicon, I think these two fabs will come up in the next 3 years' time because the financial closure, I understand, for one of them is already complete. So they should start. Land is not an issue for one of the companies, nor is power. So they should be, one of the companies should be able to start right away. In a matter of 3 years, I would not be surprised if in the Noida area that you have a semicon fab coming up next to a golf course, next to the F1 racetrack, and it's likely to happen around that area itself. So please follow that particular company and the progress it makes, and look at the right opportunity to engage with such companies. Of course, along the entire value chain of semicon manufacturing, there are plenty of opportunities, but one in particular that comes to my mind is how do you partner with these companies to elevate their competitiveness in the international market? It's not going to be easy for these companies. They're starting from ground zero, and India has no history. There is no ecosystem, whether it's chemicals or evacuation of, you need a lot of water, but chemical evacuation also is a challenge. So there will be hurdles, and in any way, the ecosystem can build itself around and make this industry competitive in India. I think it will only help because the TSMCs and the global foundries of the world are not going to sit idle watching this happen to them. So your interest in supporting this industry becomes very critical. So I encourage you to follow this very closely. On the manufacturing side, of course, there are quite a few challenges. I have been involved in exploring what could be the limiting factors. We have issues with labor, especially in the semicon industry and electronic industry. You notice that women workforce are employed significantly all over the world for various reasons. While the shop floor managers and the supervisors and the equipment maintenance is done by men, but the actual operational run is carried out by women. And in India, women cannot work in factories between 8 and 6 in the morning, 8 in the night and 6 in the morning. The third shift is not permitted. You are not allowed to employ women. Of course, there are exceptions made for the BPO industry, which are not per se considered factories, but they have been given a special status, and they are in the city. Normally, the factories are probably 60, 70 kilometers outside the city, and tend to employ people from local areas for workforce. That is definitely a challenge. Power, there is no economic zone provider or manufacturing cluster owner who is able to provide a company with an SLA for power. the power is delivered on the best effort basis, which for high-tech manufacturing like semiconductor wafer or even assembly or even electronic manufacturing is an absolute no-no. If you have to invest in case of a back-end facility, 2 to 4 megawatts of captive power, it's already going to cost you a few $1 million to set up one, and the operational cost will also be very high, which erodes the competitiveness of the manufacturing and the products that it develops. So these are two significant challenges, and the concern from the industry has been the stability of tax regime. You must have seen quite some negative press on Nokia, on Vodafone, on how retrospectively their tax returns were opened up, and the government discovered that there have been some tax evasion. The government has assured through this national policy on electronics 10 years of stable tax regime. So companies can be fairly well assured as per the policy that the tax regime will stay stable and there will be no uncertainty to any investments in the country. These are various commitments made by the government to the industry. So summarizing in half an hour, a journey of, let's say, 30 years in this country, I hope it gives you a good perspective of why we got into this state, what were some of the root causes, and why did the software industry thrive and manufacturing industry did not. But I think we have made a very good first step towards correcting it. We will not be able to reverse it in the next 3 years, nor 5 years. I think it will take us 10 years to reverse it, because you look at, follow the models of how long it took for China to evolve into what it is today, or Taiwan to what it is today. It takes 10 to 15 years time to set up a complete ecosystem that is independent. So those of who are interested in associating with this part of the development of the country will have to have a horizon of 10 to 15 years. You cannot expect returns in the next 2 to 3 years. So if you have that horizon, I think it's good to be associated with all the development in electronic manufacturing, including semiconductors, that is taking place here. So thank you very much, and I hope this was a useful overview, and I can take a few questions if some of you have. But otherwise, all the best to this program and to all of you. Yes. I can give you a model answer, or I can give you what I would believe to be challenges that anyone would face. MSIPS program is administered by the Ministry of IT, and it is administered through the central government. There is an agency called DAITI, which is Department of Electronics and IT, and there is one gentleman called Dr. Ajay Kumar, who is the Joint Secretary. Now he oversees all MSIPS proposals that land up in the government. So there is only one phase, or a few phases, in the Department of IT. The project proposal that is made towards MSIPS, there is a very detailed template that will be provided to any interested investor. It should be filled, and the approval process is pretty transparent, and at that level I don't see any chance of corruption. I know these people very well, and the government is very keen on investments for a change. In other cases, the government did not necessarily invite investments, and you were the biggest beneficiary. And obviously then the situation changes and creates an opportunity for corruption, whereas now the government is in need. Now that does not mean the bureaucracy at various levels will align with this objective of the government. But I think at the MSIPS level, at the federal level, at the central government level, I do not see any corruption possibilities at all to get access to the 25%. However, your actual project will be implemented in a state. So which means that the state governments will also have to cooperate, because the land on which you build your factory has to be in a state. And to simplify these matters, the government has set up something called as electronic manufacturing clusters, EMCs. In Bangalore, we have a brownfield cluster near Electronic City. And there's one more, Bosch has set up one in Bidadi. And there are a couple of more electronic manufacturing clusters, which is a cluster, which is a zone developed by either a private party or a private-public partnership that will facilitate or make it easy, make it simpler for companies to set up, let's say, manufacturing facility there, because they would have sought all the necessary approvals. Imports, exports as a procedure would have been taken care of. All the common facilities, let's say you are developing set-top boxes and there's an electronic manufacturing cluster for set-top boxes. So all the test facilities for certification, qualification, PCBA would form an ecosystem in that cluster, and they would be very easily accessible, including access to skilled manpower. That's the concept of a manufacturing cluster. So should anyone here wish to invest in a manufacturing facility, then you should ideally do it in a manufacturing cluster where you don't have to go through the bureaucracy of getting approval for your land and all those 40, 50 approvals that are required to set up your factory, which is where the corruption probably will still remain. But to overcome that challenge, the concept of a manufacturing cluster has been created, where the manufacturing cluster promoter will go and get the necessary approval, so that 20 other companies that set up their manufacturing facility in that cluster don't have to go through the same process. So that makes it easier for an entrepreneur who just wants to get started with his entrepreneurial venture utilizing the MSIPs, will have a lot easier time. Corruption is not gone, but someone else handles the corruption for you who's probably specialized in dealing with such situations. And you as an entrepreneur, that's not your core competence. So the government has also been pragmatic enough to ensure that while it cannot avoid corruption, it makes it easier for you to deal with it. That you don't have to see the ugly face of corruption, but since it exists, someone who's competent in doing so, who wants to establish a nice manufacturing cluster, who's from the real estate industry, knows what it takes to set up all the common facilities in a cluster, will deal with it. So at the federal level, no corruption, but at the state level may still exist, but will be taken care of by someone else, as long as you choose to invest in a manufacturing cluster. For entrepreneurs?
Are in competition stage.
Various universities to bring those skills into people that makes them relevant for the industries where investments will be made. NSDC itself is developing a curriculum and a certification process, tying up with IITs and the NITs and also other universities. So, yes, in some institutes. At IIT Mumbai, it's already started, I think, on VLSI. There's a 3-week certification course on VLSI. So, many other universities have started, let's say, in automotive electronics, on medical electronics, on very specific areas, a certification program for either as a finishing course after your engineering or after your diploma or after your ITI. You can undergo a short course of vocational training and get a certificate. And this certificate is recognized by the government of India. It's very important, right? You're not going to a private player to get trained. So certification becomes important, because with that certificate, you can seek employment in many of these facilities. The industry also, whether I am part of the executive council of ISA, we are working very closely with NASSCOM, and so is CII, to see how skills can be improved even beyond NSDC, because NSDC, being a small establishment, cannot address the needs of everyone. So the industry associations have come forward and started defining what could be those other areas where skill needs to be developed and how to work with various universities. So various initiatives are ongoing, early still, but there are some role models already between NSDC as well as including premier institutions like the IITs. Of course, there are a larger number of deemed universities that are participating in this program, because there's a grant given by the NSDC. It doesn't come for free. You get money for participating in this national skill development program. Hope you answered your question. Yeah. Definitely medical electronics, strategic electronics. I don't know if you would like to get into it. You don't want to be roped up by the US because if you develop strategic electronics, it's all about defense electronics. You're, you're talking about missiles and radar and defense technologies primarily. That's a focus area for the government because we almost import almost everything in defense. There's no local value addition. So that is one, medical electronics. I think consumer electronics is another, hardware, computer hardware, tablets, security, telecommunication. So it's pretty broad. Now the government has defined these 8 sectors primarily. 8 sectors, broadly speaking. The government does not have the specialization to define any more details. It's up to the industry associations to seek input from their members to define more clearly. So the invitation I got from the Minister of IT recently is for Infineon as a semicon company servicing energy efficiency, automotive and smart card markets to provide a list of research topics that are of interest for Infineon and which when a suitable student expresses an interest. So the government is setting up a marketplace. Now you can imagine an online portal where a student can go and present or publish what areas does he want to carry out research in, and an industry can then say, yes, I'm interested in the research topic that you have chosen, let's work together and sign up with the university. Now this portal is not yet ready, but I think it will come up. It will be on the DEITY website. So you should go to DEITY, DEITY.gov.in, but just look for Department of Electronics and IT, and you will find plenty of information. It's widely published, at least in terms of documentation, pretty widely published. Yeah, so just go there. I think enough information is available. I'm just saying this is still in its early stages, and the momentum depends on how many of you guys are actually interested in PhD, which I'm a little disappointed with, right? I don't see too many people interested in PhD, even in my own company. The midlife crisis takes over very soon, I think, in life here. Right? So, So, but imagine the government wants 1,500 PhDs here. It's funding PhDs in addition to the scholarships you get, funding universities, funding young faculty members. Now imagine 3 years later if this does not take off, who's responsible? It's us, because we have not shown interest. The IITs are there, the IIScs are there. It's just the lack of interest from young professionals to pursue specialization. But do follow. I would suggest follow the DEITY website. I'm not saying it's the simplest user interface that you can find, but it's a government organization, guys. They do the best they can. But on this PhD program, please keep following it. And being Sydney's manager, I have a terrible record of also keeping up on time. So he was off 10 minutes, and I think I'm off 20 minutes. So hopefully you as his last manager have have better credentials of starting and ending meetings on time. Anyway, one last question, I think. Was there one more? Sorry. For manufacturing, you don't. Sorry, I think I pulled a plug. For manufacturing, definitely not. So there is one stream of education or skill development focusing on preparing technicians, shop floor managers, maintenance engineers, and line supervisors, which is part of the vocational training program that National Skill Development Council is focusing on. However, if the intent is to not follow some other countries like Vietnam or Philippines or Malaysia, which primarily offer low-cost manufacturing and not innovation-led manufacturing. Those countries don't have a history, in many cases, of engineering talent. But we do. We started off with services as a background, right? Which is where potential for creating IP. It does not mean you actually created IP, but it's a knowledge-driven economy. Now, when we have been very successful in knowledge-driven economy and then trying to intersect it with manufacturing, you have to exploit what is your existing strength already, and that is engineering. And for developing products, you need specialization because you have to do state of art. You're not implementing or executing instructions or specifications written by an intellectual located in Europe or in the US. You have to be that intellectual who writes the specifications. Now, if you need someone of that stature, then you have to grow them in-house here in this country. And that is the reason why you need PhDs. People who can, now for example, sorry Srini, I am taking time, but you also said it's informal, so I assume you guys can go until 7 in the evening to complete the session. Yeah, I know. Yeah. However busy my day is, I have to end at 5:30. Sorry, I lost context. Where was I? The PhDs. The government, one of the ways of introducing something called as a non-trade barrier, which China has done very successfully, and the US has always been a master at it. The non-trade barriers that you impose, when you sign up to something called as an international technology agreement, your tariffs reduce to 0. It's black and white. There is no import duty anymore. Now, how do you still provide a competitive advantage to local companies? Otherwise, they'll be steamrolled by the multinationals, right? That is by setting up local standards, which China has done remarkably well, even in security. They say you have to conform to our algorithms. And by the way, if you're a multinational, you have to pay a royalty on this algorithm, because this algorithm on security was developed in China by the universities, while for the local companies there is no royalty, but if you're a multinational, you have to pay a royalty. The import duties are still 0, but you're creating a barrier. So this is something called a non-trade barrier. By introducing standards, certifications, any imported UPS, if it has to go through a stringent homologation or certification before it can be sold in the market, creates a barrier. Now, if for complex products, the country has to develop standards that are unique, which then creates this barrier, you need intellectuals. You can't copy paste an international standard and say this is the India standard. So you have to have something unique whereby the government can claim that this is a India standard. So there is an agency called Bureau of Indian Standards, BIS, informing people about a product and having negative experiences that affects the industry. This certification process has to be created. Now for sophisticated technologies like software, set-top boxes, security, whatever, you need a lot of talent and expertise, and that expertise should come from the PhDs. So that is again, if you talk about telecom, the government can then define what kind of special mechanism should be introduced in the system to make communication transparent, where the government can still snoop or whatever, right? It wants some transparency into the process. Now, it cannot be done free of cost. It costs intellect. You cannot hire people from outside the country to write these specifications. Now, this will require PhDs in telecom who understand end-to-end, the security, the quality of service, everything put together, and that can become the standard. That is one of the reasons why the government is pushing for PhDs. So I hope I answered your question, do you need PhDs? Yes, in the line of work that you guys are probably doing today, not necessary. But to realize the vision of becoming a global country, our country that has a global power, becomes a global power in electronic manufacturing, this is part of the ecosystem that is required to make it successful. Otherwise, we will remain as a low-cost manufacturing destination, which I think no one is interested in. Yeah. Sorry, Srini, I'll end here. Anyone who has questions, I'll stay back until coffee break, and we can continue our questioning at that time. Thank you very much, and I hope this was useful.
Thank you, Mr. Vinay Shai, for your excellent coverage and market area.